I mean, like, this is what it looks like, by the way, when a filmmaker genuinely gives a shit about their craft. Not like the slop you get served up today, where it's like, it's good enough. Here's a Dutch angle. F you.
Welcome back to Foreplay. We are in the second film of our money shot arc. Each of us has chosen a movie that has made a lot of money, which we advocate as well. So it's kind of the opposite of our spit roast arc, where we chose a personal darling for other people to murder. And my pick was Jurassic Park. Thorin's pick this week is The Godfather, Part 1, all-time classic.
Instead of already seen your episode, was that episode that different from a spit roast episode? I'm just going to say that. Like I say, I think you inadvertently turned into your Jurassic Park one inadvertently turned into the best spit roast one. We just didn't know.
That's possible.
That episode was so radioactive, it made me sick for 3 weeks. Duncan, so.
By the way, I can't lie. I did go hard as a motherfucker on that one. Like on reflection, it wasn't actually as bad as I made
it. Wasn't.
It's
a good movie. It also.
I think my problem is this. This does tie to what you're talking about. My problem is just this. Because the premise was that we're all going to love the movie, the fact that I didn't, and it's definitely aged very badly for me, just annoyed me is the problem. Because the problem is for this aspect, spoiler, when we get into this one, obviously I did pick this film, but I had a fantastic time watching this film.
Too.
This is a film I could watch a million times. I'll never get bored. I can watch it at any point. I can always soak it in. So it's just more like that. I was just underwhelmed. It's been so long since I've seen that film.
I think Jurassic Park, though, is still the kind of required viewing because of its cultural relevance, even to this day. I mean, Thorin, right after we finished that episode, you were like messaging me and we're talking about how in an esports cast, somebody made a Jurassic Park reference, and that movie's 30 years old now. So it is kind of, regardless of what you think about it, and I think it's fun and I take it for what it is, which is a silly, entertaining blockbuster with some good moments. It does have insanely memorable scenes, and like is part of an active cultural lexicon. So as is The Godfather, because to bridge this conversation into this movie may have been released in 1972, but in the last year or two, there have been a lot of like Godfather memes on the internet. Like the "look how they massacred my boy" line is just in GIFs everywhere now. And it wasn't 5 years ago, so that's kind of a very recent phenomenon.
Something I did note in this movie is how many memes and iconic lines came from this film. It's insane.
Oh yeah,
like you even forget that they're all in this film.
Here's the measure of the cultural relevance of your movie. How many times has it been parodied in The Simpsons?
Yeah,
and every scene of this movie has been parodied in The Simpsons, much like Jurassic Park. So cultural relevance, absolutely through the roof. But I mean, look, I'm like Duncan. I adore this film. I watch this movie probably about once a year. It's a movie I love to show people who, if they ever say like, "Oh, I haven't seen The Godfather" or "don't quite remember it," I'll say, "Oh, like come round to my house. I'll put it on the cinema, in the home cinema. We'll go down and we'll watch it together. And we'll have a few beers or whatever." It's just a movie where, even though you know what is coming after you've seen it a few times, you know exactly where it's going to go, what all the arcs are, or the foreshadowing, or the foreboding. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't detract from the entertainment of it. It's just visually beautiful. Every performance in it is absolutely tone perfect. The dialogue is just wonderful to listen to. Even the stuff that's actually silly and not based in reality, like he sleeps with it's a Sicilian message. He sleeps with the fishes. It's like that's never been said anywhere ever before, except in this script. No organized crime has ever done that by sending you a fish.
They don't deliver people
it's just
fishes?
Brilliant.
What the hell is this? That's a Sicilian message. It means Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes.
No, it turns out
it was, if you remember, one of the funniest parts when they did lampoon it in The Simpsons, where they make like Troy McClure. There's a thing where they imply he had sex with thing, and they go, he sleeps with the fish. He goes like, "I deny that rumor from SeaWorld." I'm like, something mad like that. Something ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Was it
They've
something like
definitely
that?
got that.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. He goes, SeaWorld banned me and it was unfair or whatever. But you know, look, there's so much to talk about, and it's probably really hard to find a unique or original perspective on it because,
Sure.
rightly so, this is one of the most organized, sorry, not organized, but analyzed movies in the history of cinema. I guess a good place to start.
Well, hold up. We should talk about the money
Yeah.
that this film made that makes it relevant
Yeah.
to the money shot.
That's
because
read my
like,
mind. I was going to say
Yeah,
it's actually
this-
crazy that a movie like this was so.
Yeah, because if
Like,
you actually look at this on its surface, sure, it was riding the wave of a recent novel release. So the novel, it was based on a novel, but it was optioned really before the novel had a chance to gain traction, right? The studios heard about this from Puzo, the author, and immediately snapped it up, right? Bought the rights to it. This movie was made for like $6 million, and it ended up making $250 million. That's not adjusted, guys. It made $250 million in 1972. So, I mean, the actual adjustment is bonkers on that. And for a film that's about an Italian-American mafia family and their conflicts and is 3 hours long, being a box office. It's quite slow.
Unless you're getting the every now and then intermittent action scene, everything else is incredibly slow. Like, actually slow. It's a snail's pace film. Yeah, it's actually incredible. This could be like the ultimate box office film, innit? It's wild.
It's a subtle family drama is what it is. And it's kind of a mystery of who's actually responsible for the hits that are going on. And the thing about, I mean, it is very, I think, reflective of reality and the way mafia works. But also we have to look at this and say, yeah, sure, there were mafia films before this, but not to the degree. I mean, this spawned the massive mafia genre, more or less. So I wouldn't say it was, and the mafia films beforehand were very, they weren't subtle. They weren't bringing you interesting, deep characters or sympathetic characters potentially to look at. It was more like cartoon villains. So I
think about like a James Cagney film. It's just a black and white villain, isn't it? There's no it's not the depth of this film and the grey area and are they good people and they're cool, their family. Yeah, this is a mega deep film.
And obviously things like The Sopranos or Goodfellas, which we're going to be doing next, wouldn't exist without The Godfather. Yes. Because if anything, like a lot of the depth of the characters in those films, and particularly like Tony Soprano, all comes from this, right? It is the original. And so it is stunning to me to think that this movie at this length could have made that much money in 1972.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's essentially like, imagine your movie is Avengers Endgame, but you made it with the budget of, I mean, what would be a small indie film these days, so you've had the blockbuster, profits, but for tiny student movie expenditure.
And until Jaws was released, this was the highest grossing film of all time, ever.
I mean, but also just for context, right? I mean, because people will be thinking, oh yeah, but like, spending $7 million to make a movie was a lot in the 70s. I mean, it actually wasn't. I mean, it's not like now where if I told you $7 million, it'd be bad. But this is still a middle of the road budget that they were given. I mean, and this is why. One of the great things about it, one of the reasons why the film feels so grounded and real and authentic is that Francis Ford Coppola used like all of his family, as extras, brought people in for all the production value, friends. He wanted to authentically show what the Italian-American experience was. And obviously he's an Italian-American himself. He's from that world. And so, he wanted the centerpiece of the movie to be a big family occasion because that is obviously, what he knew and where all of his fond memories were from, the big dinners, the food, people singing when they were drunk. And like I say, a lot of the people in the film are like friends or family members, all the little extras and stuff. And it's just great. I mean, like he really penny pinched to make a film that's just absolutely gorgeous. And you can see it's because this is what it looks like, by the way, when a filmmaker genuinely gives a shit about their craft, not like the slop you get served up today where it's like, it's good enough, here's a Dutch angle, fuck you. It's like some of the cinematography and camera work in this, the framing of the shots, the color palette, it's like everything is just top tier. It's S tier across the board. All of the work in it. This is a movie for me that it has one or two flaws, and the handful of flaws I could pick out aren't glaring by any means.
That's why I picked this film, because I thought, first of all, if we're doing an arc where it's supposed to be blockbusters that are just really good and everyone's going to enjoy it, like, I actually think this is one of those films where I would say, the analogy I would give is a bit like 2001. Everyone's heard of it. Everyone thinks they know about it. But actually, a lot of young people haven't watched it. This is one of those ones, they will have watched Goodfellas. They will have watched The Sopranos, maybe. I think a lot of people, actually, this is it for the modern Zoomer generation, this is like saying watch Citizen Kane. They're not going to do it. You know what I mean? They're going to think, it'll be boring. It's too old, isn't it? But like you say, Richard, the thing about this film is it's one of those films you almost can't overrate. You know what I mean? Like, I agree. It is almost as close to a perfect film as you can have, in my opinion, which is insane considering it is almost 3 hours long. And as I just said, it actually does at times go at a very slow pace. But I don't say that as a negative. Like, I never felt that ever when I've watched it. In fact, when I watch it, it's one of those films where I always go, first of all, when I boot it up, I go, fuck, is this really 3 hours long? And then secondly, I even find myself when I'm watching it, realizing like an awesome feeling you do get in a really good long film or a really good book where you're only halfway through and you go, oh, fuck, there's still half to go. And then you realize there's so much more of the story to unfold and so many different aspects to show you. I mean, by the way,
it's a delicious, lavish meal, like in and of itself.
Yeah. That's one area even where I also think you couldn't make this film again today, because if you made this film today, it would just be 2 parts. Like, it'd probably even be like the first part would be, the death of you'd think the death of Godfather because he's on death's door, and you'd have Michael go away to Sicily. That would be the end of part 1, and then part 2 would be his return, and then does he get the revenge, and how does it play out? But instead, it's all one film. It's just one film with this enormous, like, generational story unpacked. And also, the other reason for me it's so momentous is this is where the Coppola hype train really fucking starts. He's done other good films, but this is where he starts the run that for me is probably the best decade of direction ever. It's fucking unbelievable. The films he does that year, that decade, just blow your mind. Like, there's probably the best run, like I say, ever. And I even think you can go beyond that. A lot of people like to say he fell off and all that jazz. By the way, I don't care what anyone says. I love that Dracula film from the 90s. And there's one I always reference as a film he did in the 2000s called Youth Without Youth, which I think is like a gem. So he's just one of those all-time great directors. And I think
it's funny. It's funny you bring that up because the 50th anniversary of The Conversation's coming up. I believe there's a special release coming out in the next week or two. Or they've done a 4K restoration for it or something. But you're right. I mean, what's interesting about this film, before, we're talking with the stuff around the film rather than the film itself at the moment. But what's interesting about this film is it was such a runaway success despite studio resistance. And by the way, not just studio resistance, everyone was trying to fuck with Coppola on this. Because keep in mind, it's very early in Coppola's career in terms of like big studio movies. It's adapted by, from a novel by a guy who is a gregarious lunatic by all accounts. I mean, Mario Puzo obviously has to have a screw loose to even be writing about the mafia at a time when the mafia still had teeth. You know what I mean? It's not like now.
By the way, guys, if you guys don't know, I mean, the New York Mafia was really dismantled by the RICO laws in the 90s and 2000s. But during this time period, these guys were fucking scary. Like, they were running New York City, and like, it's not. The 5 families of New York City were a real thing that was going on, and they were at war with each other at times. But a lot of this across America, and especially in the Northeast, was divided up amongst these mafia families.
Yeah, and because of Puzo, he wanted to. I think at one point, because I haven't listened to it. I didn't have time to listen to it before this episode, but there's a book, like Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli, and it's all about the making of this film, and you can get it on audiobook from Audible or whatever. Definitely well worth it. It's really well narrated. It's super interesting if you love about this. But it was what was he called? Like, wow, Will Delayer or something. Well, anyway, there was like a genuine mafia guy coming to the fucking set. And he wanted to get involved in the movie, but they were also saying to them, like, you can't show that and you can't say that. And there was all this pressure. So think about it as a filmmaker. You've got the original novelist who thinks he should be directing the movie, sticking his fingers in the fucking gumbo. The studio's sticking its finger in the gumbo. The mafia is sticking its finger in the gumbo. You've got a character that's clearly based on Frank Sinatra. You got Frank Sinatra, who's super powerful at this period of time, telling you he's going to fucking sue you and bring you down and ruin you, and maybe he should be in the movie, and actually, now, fuck you, I don't want to be then. If you don't want me, I'll just rather sue you instead. Like, the pressure on making this film and seeing your authentic vision through is like nothing else. And not only did Coppola stick the landing by making one of the greatest movies of all time, a movie that it's never, I can't imagine, it won't happen in my lifetime. I can't imagine a period in cinematic history where this drops out like the top 5 greatest movies of all time. It's been one of the movies that has remained there, constant. Some have trends, some come, some go.
It's over 50 years old now.
Richard, this will always be in the list with Citizen Kane, Vertigo, the ones that are always top of the list. Of course.
I just can't imagine a period in cinematic history where this isn't going to be in like the top 5, top 10 movies of all time. It's just that good. And so to stick the landing and deliver that as a piece of art. Oh, and by the way, it's the most profitable movie of all time. Like after this, Coppola was royalty. He could do whatever the fuck he wanted. And this is why it makes you realize why the auteur, We're Doing Things dies, which again is wonderfully retold in the book Easy Riders Raging Bulls. It makes you understand why studios had to get away from that, because by the time Coppola does Apocalypse Now, also a masterpiece, also probably in like top 20, top 25 movies of all time, right? Everyone's having heart attacks on set. Dennis Hopper's not even delivering lines. He's on acid. It's still one of the best movies ever made about war because it was a war that Coppola went through himself. But it's untenable. These things are untenable if this is what you have to go through to create your art. But yeah, 70s Coppola is like, is he the greatest director of all time? Probably. You can make that argument.
At a minimum.
Yeah. And it really starts here. He couldn't have made Apocalypse Now. He couldn't have made The Godfather Part 2. He couldn't have made The Conversation. Conversation's a movie about fucking some guy listening to fucking tapes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's making self-indulgent. Yeah,
and amazing. And so Coppola. He won bigly, you might say, here with his film, and it allowed him to basically have the career he did. And thank God, because if this movie flops, not only do you not get Coppola's output because he would have been in exile and maybe whacked by the mob, you like Monty said at the start, there isn't a recontextualization of the mafia movie with Goodfellas. Which we'll be doing after this appropriately, because there was never a contextualization of the genre to begin with. It didn't happen. This spearheads an entire genre. There's no Tony Soprano, the complexities of balancing a clandestine secret life of crime with a real family, but one family that might pull your allegiance more than the other. There's none of that. None of that happens. And so the debt modern art, modern film, modern television owes to Francis Ford Coppola in this film. It can't be understated at all.
By the way, being as obviously the titular Godfather is also probably the most famous role ever of Marlon Brando, who himself fittingly could be the best actor ever. He's certainly on that shortlist too. I actually have a thing I want to say about that at the outset, which is that also shows you how iconic this film is. Because when you watch it, the other thing you always remember is, holy shit, this is like that thing with Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. He's the guy you remember, but he's barely in the film. He's only in the film for a couple of scenes. He's that much dialogue, just like the famous Anthony Hopkins one where he won the Oscar. But I think they say something like he's on screen like 17 minutes of the film or something. But in your brain, everything's him on screen. It's that those are the scenes that you remember. So there's a little detail I want to make a point about that I made a point about on our episode about Touch of Evil, which is the exact same thing happened with people misremembering a great actor that happened to Orson Welles. So I told you the story that when Orson Welles played the character of Hank Quinlan, the corrupt detective in Touch of Evil. There's a famous story that afterwards he came to he was doing the movie and he was too busy on set, and he went to a friend's house to a party and he couldn't take all the prosthetics off. And the joke goes, but it wasn't a joke. People were saying, "You look great, Orson," and he was going, "What are you talking about? I've got all these." People just thought he was a fat mess because his status in the industry. People do the same thing, Monty. They misremember in this movie and they think this is Brando at the end, like Island of Dr. Moreau Brando. They even think the reason he's doing that voice is because he's all fat. He isn't. He's literally put like stuffing in his cheeks, guys. This is when he is a diva as an actor, but he still looks really good, actually. By the way, he looked phenomenal for his age in this film. Also, he isn't, even though I've heard similar stories that he didn't learn some of his lines. In this film, he fucking kills it, bro. His fucking think about when you think of some of his classic film performances before, where he's like over the top, massively energetic. This is a really subtle, nuanced performance as well. I think this is a phenomenal performance by Marlon Brando.
I mean, Marlon Brando's amazing, and for this, the story is when he was doing his screen test or whatever, he had put cotton swabs in the bottoms of his cheeks. They actually made a prosthetic for him for the film, but I mean, it's genius that he thought himself to do that to alter the sound of his voice. And
he also wanted to alter the shape of his face as well, because he said he imagined he was a bulldog. That was like, a lot of actors from that method school, they would like channel animals. Like I remember a bonkers interview with Robert De Niro where he was talking about Travis Bickle, and he said, when I played Travis Bickle, I imagined I was a crab. It's like whatever you have to do to get to where you need to be to pull off these fantastic performances.
And if people are unfamiliar with Marlon Brando too, because you're only
crab.
If people are unfamiliar with Marlon Brando, I think you should go back and watch some of his older films from 20 years before this, because he was a stage
on the
actor.
Waterfront, all that shit, all of it. Yeah.
Streetcar Named Desire. I mean, one of the most interesting film scenes that always sticks with me, not just in terms of Marlon Brando, but in general, if you want to see some really insane disparity between actors on a screen in terms of acting talent, is he acted in the play version in the theater of Streetcar Named Desire, which is a Tennessee Williams play. Then he did the film A Streetcar Named Desire. And if you want to watch there's a scene in the play and in the film where he is just sitting there eating a chicken. Okay. And he is irresistibly charismatic while he's just eating the chicken. He's there with the two women who are in that story and having a conversation around the dinner table. And you can't even pay attention to them because him eating the chicken is the most fucking interesting thing you've ever seen. And he's extremely handsome when he's younger. And he is just unbelievably charismatic and nuanced in his acting ability, which is why he had gotten all this fame. It was huge for him to be in this movie. And then later on, of course, we can talk about Marlon Brando forever, but you guys mentioned the Isle of Dr. Moreau, which was very late. It was 24 years after this movie in the 90s, which is a disaster of a film that starred him and Val Kilmer. And
definitely watch the documentary about the making of that.
I was going to say the film isn't interesting, but the documentary what is it? It's like I think it's called The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Isle of Dr. Moreau.
Like, what a dick Val Kilmer is amazing too. Like, it's actually a really fucking funny documentary. You got to watch it.
I mean, just the nightmare combination of Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer on this movie is just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. So,
well, I mean, the best part about that is Marlon Brando bringing on that little person, and saying he's now in every scene because he is the future of acting. That's what he said. He said he is the future of acting, and he must be in every scene I'm in. And Richard Stanley's just like, well,
I know it's
all right then. I'll try and make it work.
I love it.
It's
it got really mental. I mean, both him and Orson Welles had very interesting trajectories to the later stages of their careers.
The key, though, is there's a key difference in Brando's career, and it's probably round about the time he sent that fake Native American up to get his Oscar. That's probably the split. But young Marlon Brando loved the craft and the acting, and obviously he got very, very big. He was a heartthrob very quickly in his career. I mean, 'cause he's just a stunning looking guy with real charisma and a real aura about him. But somewhere along the line, I think he just got disenchanted again with that studio system, all the shit he saw. And so there's a very different, like, end stage Brando. He hates, everything he does is about pissing off the director, making their life as hard as possible, having all accommodations made for him, because he believed, if you want to mine my talent or whatever you think it is. And by the way, he never called himself the greatest actor of all time.
No.
He repudiated that. He hated that term. He said, how do you even measure that to begin with? You know, he said that multiple times in multiple interviews. It was never a mantle he took on. It was another reason why
he's even one of those people,
with it.
Richard, who even though he comes from that acting school, doesn't believe. I think Rob De Niro's the same. They actually don't also think people overhype like the craft of acting. To them, they're the sort of people that are like, you just do it. You know what I mean? You don't overthink it. By the way, if anyone wants to know about Marlon Brando, there's a brilliant documentary made in 2015 called "Listen to Me, Marlon," where it turns out he actually recorded loads of cassettes of just his thoughts during his life. And so after his death, they made a documentary out of it where you can essentially, you finally get the insight you never got from an interview. You get to find out what he was like as a child, or what happened with his father, or why he thought that. So it's really revealing. But it's the reason why it's so interesting is because, as you say, Richard, towards the end, he's just portrayed by, unsurprisingly, the people he's pissing off as, like another diva, a lost talent, what an arsehole, traitor to America, all the things like that. Whereas actually, he's just a very complicated person, and I imagine his genius came from the same place as all this resentment later.
And look, also another thing that's got to be said is there's always this weird back and forth when it comes to cinematic analysis and just movie history. A lot of people are a bit like leery of method acting. There's a lot of anecdotes to that effect. One that immediately sort of comes to mind is, and people love to tell this one, it was when Laurence Olivier, classically British trained theatre actor, right? He was doing Marathon Man with Dustin Hoffman.
Yes.
And he has to get tortured by Laurence Olivier in one of the scenes. And so Dustin Hoffman, to look more fraught and like stressed, he stayed awake for like fucking 2-3 days, like wasn't fucking eating properly. So he came in, eyes like piss holes in the snow, layer of grease on his face, right? And Laurence Olivier is like, my boy, you look terrible. And he's like, you know what, to get ready for the scene, I stayed up for like 3 days. And Laurence Olivier said, my boy, have you not just tried acting? And
there
that
you go.
right
That's
there
the vibe. Yeah.
That's the vibe.
That's the vibe.
And unfortunately, that is why I think a lot of, how should we say, late stage Marlon Brando's, peccadillos and behavior, that's why it's a lot easier to ridicule him. But actually, when you look at prime Brando, and even though this might not be like typically prime Brando, it might be the end of prime Brando, let's say, this is an exemplary an exemplary example. That's a non sequitur, but whatever the fuck, you get a point.
Sure.
This is a fantastic example of method acting at its finest, what it can be. This is a guy who completely transforms his physical appearance, completely transforms his voice, has incredible range in the movie. He's domineering in the opening scene, even though all he's doing is stroking a fucking cat in a chair like a Bond villain, right?
But let's be frank, you never wanted my friendship. And you were afraid to be in my debt.
Then he's incredibly vulnerable when he loses his son.
Look how they massacred my boy.
And just your heart breaks for him. I mean, like, really impactful. And then obviously at the end, I mean, after the assassination attempt, just before he dies, when he's playing with the kid in the garden, looks incredibly frail. Yeah, it looks incredibly frail. Yeah, and genuinely for the great Don, Corleone, to go out like this in a garden, just playing with his kids, and to be found later. his
better than he deserved in many ways. It's a good death for him.
Well,
there's actually one area I think you could get into, which is I actually saw that even, by the way. I think people misconstrue that death because, in my opinion, what that death shows is that, like, this is why you have to be the Godfather. Because you, at the end of the day, do you die in a shootout doing what you love as the Godfather, or do you just die as an old ass man with your kid? You die anyway, either way. Like, it's coming for you anyway. You get the death. And actually, that death, even though some people would say they'd want the death like that, when I see that death, it kind of is a bit pathetic. Like, that does sort of make me think. I see why Vikings wanted to die in battle at the peak of their powers. You know,
he won't be going to Valhalla.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you're someone who, like, if you put it this way, if you want to contrast it, think about the death that James Caan has in this film. He has the warrior's death. He has the thing where he's viewed up with the righteous anger and he's going at them. But by the way, we can segue this and talk about that. The cast in this film is fucking unbelievable. And if you think about the fact that, like, it's not just a good cast, and then think about a lot of good casts are misused or whatever. Yeah. The casting of the characters archetypally is unbelievable. Like, James Caan, by the way, is easily the forgotten great actor of his generation. All of the others in these films get all the plaudits, the hype, did all the great things. This guy nails it as Sonny. This fucking the anger of the character, the older brother character. Yeah, the one who's not going to be the one who's smart because, you know, I've got to, like, strike back at them. That he fucking kills that aspect. And by the way, what a great mafia archetype there.
No more. Not this time, Consigliere. No more meetings, no more discussions, no more Salazzo tricks. You give him one message, I want Salazzo. If not, it's all out war. We go to the
Some of the other families won't sit still.
They hand me Salazzo.
Then you contrast that with Pacino, who's the more sensitive guy. He's the one that, you know, he's the good kid you're keeping out of all the hood activities because he's going to go and do something legit. But then he gets drawn into it because of the responsibility. I mean, we were talking before the episode. The sleeper performance is easily fucking Robert Duvall as the lawyer guy. Like, I think he actually kills it. And between the first two films, holds the films together. He's sort of the glue. And in some ways, I also, you notice an aspect of the film he allows us to have is because they're constantly telling him, like, of course, you're not part of the family, you know, we're the stand-in for him. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we see the family through his eyes. We don't know what it'd be like to be an Italian mob so we're getting to see like the differences and where it does and what the difference between family and people who work for you are. It's beautifully done, this film. Yeah.
I mean, just on to wrap up the point about, you know, the characterization of the Don. I think what the movie does really well, actually, and I was thinking about this watching it, you know, now, is it does a great job of actually. It never puts Don Corleone in the same room as an atrocity that he's authorized, if you know what I mean. Like,
very mob boss of him.
Yes, there's never a through road to his violence. So he's always a likable character. You know, look, you could go back and forth on
this.
If
anything,
in the
he's
book.
Victimized by violence because he is directly shot multiple times.
It's right, but the craziest detail when you've already seen the other films is think about how genius this is, Richard. We've in the past talked about how obviously all like the Alien films now, and one of the first worst things about those films is everyone who ever saw the first Alien went, fuck, I wish I knew who those space jockeys were. And then now you go, well, careful what you wish for, because you don't always want it. Sometimes the mistake is better. Well, the joke is, if you haven't seen the sequel to this film, you would think if someone said, what if we just like did like a prequel where we like showed you how he became you'd go, no. It makes it better. They somehow actually make it even better. They fill in the mystique with itself, like amazing characterization, and obviously also one of the all-time generational actors in Robert De Niro. So that's the other reason why the first two films in this series are like peerless as a 1-2.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so he's never, you know, directly doing anything violent. He's always like authorizing it, talking around it. He at his most vulnerable moment, the look how they massacred my boy. He is seeing the direct consequences of violence. He's sort of shielded away from
it. He's even willing later to make the peace, even though it is his son that's being killed. It even shows like a level of like maturity that's crazy.
Diane lost the son. I lost the son. We're quits. And if Natalia agrees, then I'm willing to let things go on the way they were before.
Yeah, but also, I must add, whenever an anecdote is being told about the Don, it's horrifying. when you know, when they're even just the throwaway ones right at the start about the fucking made him an offer he can't refuse. It's like, think about that, right? You're just a guy, you're working in the music business, right? And you've got a guy who you're like, I can't have him work for me anymore. It's just not going to work like that. And then a guy literally turns up, puts a gun to your head, and says, either your signature or your brains are on this fucking contract, mate. And the Don's done that, and he's explicitly done that. And then the horse's head in the bed. It's your boy Don Corleone who's fucking asked for that, and yet here he is, this lovable old man with an orange in his mouth doing it. I love that about this film. That like he's probably a monster. I mean, like, you know, listen, it's complicated, isn't it?
Oh no, I'm going to get into this. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
go for it.
You know, and obviously if you've seen 2 and read the books and everything, like, yeah, I mean, holy shit, like some of the stuff he did was gnarly as fuck. But I mean, like, what I love about the movie is it's this incredibly violent, horrible world that they live in, and they are ruthlessly successful within that world. One of the top families, but also all of these characters are like sympathetic and lovable. Like James Caan as Sonny Corleone is a fucking animal. Like he's an actual animal, but I'm devastated every time he gets machine gunned to death.
Oh, think about the genius of putting in that subplot about his sister. Well, when you see how he protects his sister, that humanizes him instantly. He's not just an idiot rageaholic, is he?
Perfect.
Like in some ways, he's one of the only ones who's willing to actually not turn a blind eye to some fucked up things in other ways.
Because there's a code of honor and there is loyalty. You know, there's a sense of duty and loyalty here, and even if the entire, you know, chivalry is to uphold what is essentially, you know, a harmful criminal enterprise, it still is more noble than petty crime, right? And it's more predictable and it has more rules, which is why.
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Which is why police and governments often prefer to have organized crime, because it actually keeps things under control instead of just spiraling into pure lawlessness.
It's the same logic as why in prison you sort of let the prisoners run the prison in a way, because instead of you having a one-to-one manage every prisoner, you allow a criminal hierarchy and then they have their own punishment, their own court. By the way, that's one thing Richard touched on that I did want to go into. I wanted to see if we'd bring this up. I think the flaw of media literacy wankers watching this movie is this premise of like, oh, there are no good and bad characters, or everyone's just morally grey. That's not at all what this film's about. Like, I actually think the beauty of this film is that people are multifaceted. So guess what? You know, in the same way as someone who actually has talent who made a World War II concentration camp film would show the horror of the commissar guy who's the commander but then if you were smart, you'd show him go home to his kids and give him the chocolate and pat the fucking Alsatian. And so
makes it way more important, doesn't it? How could kind people do this?
Exactly. The flaw, in my opinion, is watching this movie and thinking the good guy is Don Corleone and Michael. I am on their side. They are the good gangsters, and look, the bad ones are No, that's one thing I'm just going to reference for modern day shit. That's the other thing about The Sopranos that is clearly a love letter to this film and this style of thing, is that they are simultaneously bad people doing very bad things. Sometimes, by the way, not always by a code of honor. Sometimes capriciously. Sometimes they just fuck you over because they don't like you and kill you just because, fuck it, that was my mate. I'll double revenge your guys. You know, you do some horrific things. But the point is, you also then, in other dimensions and other facets, can be a cool, like to your family, you might be a brilliant person, you might be a man of your word. So I'll just give a very quick contrast. It's why, even though I really enjoy Peaky Blinders for Cillian Murphy's performances, I actually think that show is fucking ridiculously written, because that show is actually written that he is the good guy and that at the end he has to always win, even though if you ever watch, he is literally reveling in the worst. They got people's eyes out, for fuck's sake. Like, they are doing the most heinous shit themselves, but the logic of that show goes, no one's allowed to do it to them because you identify with them. So once it's done to them, well, now they have to get their revenge. It's like, bro, think how many people should be owed revenge on them fucking Peaky Blinders people. Whereas in this movie,
privilege, basically.
Yeah, whereas in this movie, I actually think the genius of this movie, like I said about the scene where Marlon Brando basically says, like, I will agree, I lost a son and you lost a son, let's leave it at that, is because they just live in this world where violence just is a reality. It's not a choice. It's just, when do you do the violence is the choice. There's always going to be violence. There's always going to be murders. There's always, even as you see in this movie, going to be freelancers, people who try to make something happen, almost like, you know, who will rid me of this troublesome priest, and then they go kill the guy for you, but maybe that wasn't the boss's orders, and you have all this back and forth intrigue. But the genius of it is, like, it isn't the case that they're just morally good or justified in any way, but you're just in this world. This is like one of the key themes of this film, actually, repeated throughout the whole characters of Don Corleone, Sonny, and then Michael, is the notion that on some level it does always have to be business, but on some level it's personal too. It's both blurred.
This is business, not personal.
They shot my father.
Even the shooting of your father was business, not personal, Sonny.
Well, then business will have to suffer, all right? Hey, listen, do me a favor, Tom. No more advice on how to patch things up. Just help me win, please, all right?
In fact, that's one of the things I have to say when I watch the film I find really hard. I'm so used to the traditional story tropes that, like, for example, I'm right there with Sonny. The second you try and kill my father, we'd fucking go to war with all of them. Fuck, like, peace. We're not ever gonna have it. But that's not the reality of organized crime. If you do it that way, it will be eye for an eye and everyone will be dead. And one family will be completely wiped out. There's actually some weird tension that has to exist in this crime world. And you really do have to, as bizarre as it is for a civilian like us to think of, sometimes you have to go, look, they did literally just in cold blood murder my family member the other day. But you know what? For the sake of the business and the rest of the family, we've got to make a deal, which is like, to me, that's an alien concept. But that's why I also think this film is brilliant. The headspace it puts you into a totally different headspace.
Well,
like, really, like I say about the Devalka, you are brought into this family and you're learning the ropes as you go, as it were.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that with Vito Corleone, he does lose. He loses in every conceivable way, basically, within this film, where he himself is attacked and almost dies. He loses his family member, his son, because he's the one who takes up the mantle to be like the acting boss, while Vito is recuperating from his injuries. And he has to go with his hat in hand, and the whole thing starts because he doesn't want to run drugs, but he is basically in the end forced to run drugs because the other mob families want to do this, and what they need from him is money and his political connections because he's the one with the most clout with the government, basically, with the judges and the politicians, right? And so he is forced into it, but he doesn't actually get what he wants, and he cannot dictate the terms of the way that the other families are running their business. It's only when Michael comes in that he cleans house. But as we suspect,
it's it clear, Monty, that the reason why you can't really just win as their family is the other families will just join against you, and it's like 4 against 1, isn't it? So you actually have to have this uneasy alliance somehow, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the premise as well of what was being done to them was that, okay, we'll kill the Don, right? We failed that, but now we'll kill the capable sons. We'll kill Michael, right? When he fucks off to Sicily, and obviously his wife, Apollonia, right? And the reason for that was Fredo's a pussy. We can just totally control him. So if he becomes the head of the family, that's perfect for us. And so obviously that's why Sonny gets murked and everything else. But
also, by the way, that's one of the only moments I become a pleb, Richard, because even though in this movie he doesn't do much, does he? Fredo comes on screen, I want to throw tomatoes. But he's traitor. Yeah. That's the only guy that elicits that reaction. By the way, one quick thing to mention before I forget is this is why that point I said earlier about do not think they're the good guys. Bro, there is a line early on, right? Think about the opening scene where, funnily enough, if you ever seen The Day Hunter, it's reminiscent of that, isn't it? You get this whole family wedding, you're getting all this like wholesome activity, right? Within that, there's a line they drop that shows you these are not good people. One of the people who's just like, just like a fucking capo or something, just some guy within their organization, looks and he sees they're giving the wedding money over, and he goes like, I can't remember the lights, so like how much thousand that is, and then he just says something like, if this wasn't like the boss's wedding, we'd steal that, essentially. Like what
20, 30 grand in small bills, cash, in that little silk purse.
Madonna, if this was somebody else's wedding, sfortunato.
Yeah, if you went to a wedding, a normal wedding, you would just steal all the money of the bride and groom. Like, bro, these aren't good people. They aren't. No. But they also just live in this insane world. Yeah.
No, I mean, there's definitely, a big part of the movie is talking about the poisonous and corrosive, nature of being in that world, and that's exactly what kind of Michael's journey is all about. Really, how he starts as an outsider. Who they don't want him to come into it because they recognize it is poisonous and it's corrosive. But essentially, through circumstance, Michael has to be the one to step up to the plate, because after is after the assassination attempt on his dad. He's the only one who can get in a room with the perpetrator, and they are going to hit back, and they're gonna hit back. I mean, it goes into more detail in the book, but like Sollozzo is quite a wily, kind of guy. He's quite, quite smart, and he's protected by that corrupt police chief McCluskey or whatever he's called.
And they already took out their hitman with Luca by killing Luca Brasi. So there isn't anybody to actually do the dirty work.
Yes, and not that Luca Brasi could get anywhere. That motherfucker's backstory. People just run a mile when he was coming. One of the minor quibbles in the film is because they take out his backstory. When he dies, you don't realize how significant that is. I would say, because he's a fucking monster. He is an absolute. He is insane. Like he throws a baby into a fucking furnace. This guy is an animal in the books. Like he's like irredeemable. That's why they don't even want him to talk to the Don and say thank you. Everyone's uneasy around him. He is unnaturally violent, this guy. So people don't know that in the film. It's all kept out. So when he gets got by the old hand to the table garrote trick, you're like, oh, come on, I saw that coming a mile off, mate. But whatever. Anyway, there's another bit they leave out, which would have made the McCluskey assassination more significant. In the book, Michael gets his face mashed in by McCluskey when he's outside the hospital. McCluskey beats him so hard with a pistol, it leaves him permanently deformed. And so obviously, because it's Al Pacino, leading man, they do
add that to his face.
Yeah, he's got this kind of, again, brilliant acting. But in the book, it's like he's got a visible hole in his face.
Right.
It's kind of like what they did with Tyrion in Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? Where it's
sure.
Tyrion is unbelievably ugly. He's got no nose in the books. You know what I mean? But in the TV series, you can't do that to Peter Dinklage. You can't have a CGI hole in his face for the whole of the fucking thing. So anyway, the assassination hit where Michael goes and kills him. It's obviously starting a journey into him becoming an unrecognizable person. It takes his soul. It really does. And obviously, if you know the second film, and sadly the third, whatever, it does. It literally takes everything from him, because that is what the life does. It's actually quite tragic, I think, to see him at the end in the chair with the door closing. And him lying to his, lying to his wife. But that's what it takes to be the Don. And so it is a movie very much about how there's a degradation cycle associated with lives of violence that will essentially snatch all spirituality and worth from you as a person.
By the way, I think that's even a part that probably gets missed by people, is it's not that in this world, everyone is aware of all the crimes and everything going on and all the families complicit. No, the whole premise is you keep that shit away from your family. That's business. You even only do this type of business, like you honor the gift in a private back room. You don't do that out in the middle where all the weddings going on. And obviously the women folk, they intentionally see no evil, hear no evil. They don't want to know even what's happening. That you're just someone who, the joke is like in Tony Spratt, you're an independent businessman who works in waste removal, and they don't ever get to know
and you're bringing home a fat paycheck, right? And you're giving them a good life.
I mean, by the way, you could even make an obvious analogy if you want to take the American angle, which is, isn't that what all the evil businessmen do in the corporate world? In the corporate world, they're fucking everyone, killing everyone, ruining everyone's lives. But then they come back to their family, and you're with your family now, keep that work at the office. It's like, I actually think that aspect's quite fascinating. Like, I even found it amazing, the aspect, which is, because this is just so jarring in the modern day, the way that, because this is the 70s, sort of norms and sentiments, the way that they have that character, the sister character, beg for Sonny to not go and attack her husband who's savagely beating her with a belt in the fucking bathroom. That's played as a very nuanced angle. She doesn't want him to go and do that. I think this film has so much depth and so many layers to it, so many things you forget as well.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, it's like, all of the characters really are, they're multifaceted. I think if this wasn't being adapted from good source material and wasn't being handled by a director that absolutely wanted to nail this authentically, I think you get Michael Corleone is the good guy I'm the goody two shoes. Oh, now I must kill someone. Oh no, killing people bad. Oh no, I like it. It would have been really shit and lame. What you have to understand about, Michael Corleone is he's just got back from a fucking war. He's already a fucking.
He's primed.
He's already G. Yeah,
he was a Marine in World War II. I mean, this film starts in 1945. The time period this film is 10 years from 45 to 55, right? And
they all do it subtly. They all call him the war hero, He's a war hero back from the war. But what the fuck did he do? What do you do to get them medals on your chest, Michael? You know what I mean? And so you've got that, and then it's like, Sonny is he's the hothead, but he's a hothead. He's sensitive, like he wouldn't, like he won't allow violence around women. That's definitely getting took care of. That's not happening on my watch. You're not doing that to my sister. He's the one who probably, out of all of them, has no pragmatism.
Yep.
Where he has no pragmatism if the pragmatism is going to sacrifice his loyalty. He's the most loyal character, fiercely. He's not just a hothead, violent, can't control his temper. It's actually quite calculated and quite targeted. And then obviously the sleeper performance we talked about, Tom Hagen. Tom Hagen is, again, fiercely loyal to the Don. He is the adopted child because he's like American Irish, which again is significant if you know the history of Italian Americans and American Irish.
So briefly, I mean, I think it is worth noting, at this point in time, before we talk about Tom Hagen, because he is a very interesting character and he's like the reverse of Michael in many ways. Which is a fascinating dynamic that really works well. But, Italian, you're going to hear a lot of, words like WAP or, that are used for Italians. And, there was a long period of time in American history, particularly in the 19th century, where, if you follow the way that Americans talk about kind of divisions in America right now, they're many of them are racial, right? But at the time that Italians were immigrating, they were not thought of as the same race really as other white people, right? Like Southern Europeans were considered separate from the Northern Europeans that had mostly constituted the people who had previously immigrated to the United States. And, before them, too, were the Irish. And the Irish were not very well received when they came to America because, remember, they were mostly fleeing the potato famine in Ireland. And so there were literally
criminals in indentured servitude and that.
I mean, they were incredibly poor, and they were flooding in literally by the millions in the middle of the 19th century, guys. So like getting a few million Irish people, I used to live in Ireland, and to put this in perspective, guys, when the potato famine happened, there were 8 million people in Ireland, and like half of them left. There aren't, or died. There aren't even 8 million Irish people now. Like the population never fucking recovered from this. And we're talking like 150 years, over 150 years later at this point in time. So, there was a lot of turmoil because these immigrant groups were coming in waves from Europe. And so it'd be like this nation would send a bunch of immigrant people, and the typical Northern European, the British people, the German people, the Scandinavian people who had come there earlier a lot of the time were not very fond of the Irish coming or the Italians
there was
coming.
That famous sign, Monty, that is real. The sign on the shops used to say, "No blacks, no dogs, no Irish."
Yep.
Yeah.
That was what the sign famously used to say, for real.
Yeah. I mean, and what's also, a thing that I think it's easy for people to forget is during this time, obviously these immigrant groups, they were ghettoized. And then they were pitted against each other.
Well, they had nowhere to go. I mean, these people were fleeing a literal famine, and they were packed together on ships coming from Ireland, and like a lot of them died in the crossing of the Atlantic, and it was a nightmare. But they didn't have money or anything when they showed up, and so obviously not all of them, but some of them became kind of a menace to society. Like you can see that in Gangs of New York, right? But in New York City in particular, the Irish gangs around 5 Points were famous. There was a lot of organized Irish crime.
But that's the wonderful significance of the character, which again, unfortunately, due to time constraints, because you could have your own fucking movie just about Tom Hagen.
It could be a spin-off.
Like you know what I mean. Like you could just have Tom Hagen, his stories. That
Better Call Tom,
the movie. Yeah. Like because he was homeless. So this is the story about Tom Hagen is he was homeless. He was on the streets. He'd ran away from an orphanage, no parents, right? And Sonny was made friends with him when they were like 12 years old or something, and he kept bringing him home to meet like his dad and everything. And so in the end, Vito Don Corleone puts him through law school, and there's always this interesting kind of thing. It's like, how predatory is it? Because he definitely needs a lawyer. He needs a shit hot lawyer, right? And a shit hot lawyer who's completely beholden to you is certainly useful. But what's also interesting is because he makes him consigliere, the guy that's going to go out and actually conduct all of his official business and be his representation. So he's not in the rooms he can't
and
be
his
in
closest counselor as well,
purposes.
right?
Yeah. Well, so all the other mobs, they say the Corleones are an Irish gang because Italians and Irish at this time do not get along. They are divided. Society's been set up to pit these two groups against each other. But old pragmatic Vito, he sees through that. He brings an Irish person in, and he doesn't care actually that an Irish person is going to be his representation. And another little interesting point is, Tom Hagen doesn't just learn like Italian, he learns Sicilian dialect in the book, so he can be authentically Sicilian around.
By the way,
the Cosa
one
Nostra
detail, because I know people are going to get lost with this, right? In the film, the scenes that have no subtitles, you're supposed to not know. It's not a mistake on your like DVD copy, guys.
Yeah.
There are scenes where you're supposed to be like
Correct, yeah.
not Italian and going, what are they saying? It's not important. Like if you ever like read the translation, there's nothing sick you miss out on. That's actually intentional. You are supposed to not know what they're saying, like the diner scene, for example.
And
exactly,
by the way,
exactly.
I do think we should talk about, Tom Hagen and Michael Corleone being mirrors of each other, because Tom Hagen is the outsider, the adopted member of the family, who is then educated and let into, like, he is the educated member, right? He has a higher education, he has a graduate degree, he is a professional, and he is let in to the society and given a rank within it. Whereas Michael is the actual blood member of this family who is intentionally excluded at the start of this. And also by the end, their roles have kind of reversed, because they tell Tom Hagen, you are not a wartime consigliere, right? We need to get you out of here because you aren't built for this shit.
Why am I out? You're not a wartime consigliere, Tom. Things may get rough with the move we're trying.
Maybe I could help.
You're out, Tom.
And the guy who was supposed to not be built for it, Michael was supposed to be the one who was too sensitive to actually do the dirty work, becomes the hardened killer by the end of this, and orders, the murder of basically every other Don within the five families, and takes control of New York City by the end. And so it's fascinating to see like these characters play off each other super nicely. And it is a very, very interesting and deep dynamic that is developed. And the comparison is just right there for you to look at and appreciate.
Yeah. And look, I mean, there's moments where you can sort of feel Tom Hagen's pain a little bit, because it's not, again, I don't know if it's explicitly stated in the film, but he isn't adopted. He doesn't actually adopt him. He does everything but, because Vito doesn't want to disrespect his dead parents. He thinks that would be going too far. Yet Vito definitely loves him. I think some people don't, they go back and forth on this, but he is, for me, like when you're looking at the movie, sort of canonically, he's not blood, but he's definitely one of the brothers. He's definitely one of the kids, and the kind of journey he goes through is, it is essentially a mirror. He ends up under Michael being a bit more frozen out as Michael is pulled in as well. Like Michael wants to do things his way. He's going to use Tom and all the experience, and certainly trusts him, but also Michael has got his own ideas about where he wants to take the family, and that's apparent by the end, especially after all of the stuff with Fredo, the character we haven't even talked about yet, and should. I love that. I love that there is a complex, because he's not, well, he is a traitor, isn't he? But It's more complicated.
He's kind of a
than
pathetic
that.
traitor
That's the
too.
thing. I actually thought they always did shade. That's an area as well where I joked before playing him as just the ultimate villain. There's even a level of multifaceted nature to Fredo because, again, everyone has been in a family. So if any of you had siblings, do you not understand what it's like to be the one that will never be given the responsibility, will never be trusted, is always silly old Fredo, and you're the one who wants to prove... By the way, he's basically like a shit version of Commodus out of Gladiator. He wants to prove to his father he can be the leader, he can be the empire, and he's got other fucking qualities, but he doesn't have he's not Sonny, he's not even Michael, for fuck's sake. And so in that scenario, and as you see, by the way, people will forget, the iconic line, "You don't ever go against the family," is when he's stupidly cocking out his own family to some fucking people he works with, and he's letting them just slap him around figuratively, and literally, it turns out.
Fredo, you're my older brother, and I love you. But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again. Ever.
So no, I actually think the funny thing is, even though in part 2, spoiler, obviously he is the ultimate piece of shit, and it's sort of like actually a good moment when he dies, you see that it's not as simple as that. Like, you can see that once upon a time he was just the brother who wanted to fit in and was himself like made to feel like he wasn't important, etc., and sort of grasps for relevance and something he can be involved in. And no, even that part, I can even feel sorry for him on some level. And obviously the actor kills it with that role. The guy people don't know that we mentioned from Dog Day Afternoon.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, again, like every film he was in was just a fucking classic and then sadly taken too soon. But I mean, look, I think the Fredo interactions are just fantastic because if anything, I prefer this almost like subtle shading of betrayal. Basically what happens in the movie, which I'm sure you've all watched if you're listening to this, but just for a recap, obviously he gets sent down to Vegas where he's sheltered by Mo Green, who old Mo Green,
the Jewish gangster,
the Jewish gangster casino legend Mo Green, who gets fucking murked at the end. Brilliant. But anyway, and while he's down there, even though he's sheltering Fredo, he is really I mean, well, is he in the wrong? Like, this is another how wonderfully subtle it is. Mo Green probably was right to slap him around. Like, Fredo was banging cocktail waitresses and just being a fucking prat. Yeah, he was just being disrespectful,
indiscreet, all the rules violated. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So Mo Green gave him a slap, but you can't do that to a Corleone. So Michael comes down and says, "What do you mean you're going to straighten out my brother?"
We had a little argument Friday night, so I had to straighten him out.
You straightened my brother out?
He was banging cocktail waitresses 2 at a time. Players couldn't get a drink at the table. What's wrong with you?
And then later, when Michael says, "We're going to buy all of your fucking casino, so you name a price, or we'll go the other way on it," and he goes, "I'm Mo Green. You can't come and do this to me, you fucker, Mo Green." Turns out he can do it to you, and fucking does, in one of the greatest murderous montages ever recorded at the end.
It's
where
a banger.
Everyone
It is a banger montage.
yeah. While he's in church as well, it's fucking too good, man. But anyway, like obviously, then he goes back later, and even then, Fredo's trying to talk him out a bit, saying, "Oh, you can't do this to my friend Mo Green. Come on, Michael, be reasonable." And he's just like, "Don't you ever fucking side with anyone against the family ever again."
It's outrageous that he does that.
Yeah, it is. It is. And spoiler, it's more outrageous in the sequel. Won't say anything. Go watch Godfather Part 2. But yeah, I mean, I just love it. I love it. It's believable. It's exactly like Duncan says. Imagine being on the shelf the whole time. The runt of the litter. By the way, they explicitly explain he was the runt of the litter in the sequel. He's the sickly baby who they don't know if he's going to live, and they're putting a glass on and like a candle on top of it and trying to like draw blood to the top because he thinks he's going to die of like pneumonia or something. It's like it's so perfect, and he doesn't. You can see he doesn't understand what he's doing is wrong because he doesn't understand this world, and he never will. He's never going to get it. He is an idiot. He, even at the height of like, do you know why you're in Vegas, Fredo? You're in Vegas right now because the family is under assault. They are trying to kill us all. And you're just out here partying. You're just out here drinking cocktails, having sex, banging hookers. Like, don't you get it? Don't you understand what's going on? Yeah, like, no, he's just fucking got the blinkers on. I just love him. Like I say, everyone's performance in this movie is just wonderful. Like I can't like we're only talking about the main actors, obviously because of time, but I mean, I think Diane Keaton is fucking great in this. I've always had a soft spot for Diane Keaton because she used to do all the Woody Allen movies, and I'm a pretentious wanker. She did obviously Manhattan, which I love that film. And anyway, I think she's great in this. As kind of the way she is pushed out of Michael's life, and that speech at the end where she wants to know the truth.
Think about how fitting this is as well, Richard. What actually shows as well, because she's another outsider getting to look into this world and decide, well, what shows her actual entry into the family is that scene where she clearly knows, like, obviously he's lying to me. It's not really true that he didn't do all this stuff. And now let's close the door. Like, that's such
the last shot is just so amazing with they're like zooming out of the doorway and they're just like
Don Corleone.
Oh, by the way, there's another thing. Because obviously that theme tune is famous. When they do it as like the little refrain, like that haunting, fucking phenomenal.
Yeah, because it has that stinger at the end when the door shuts. So it's just building up. And it just ends on like the discordant slam of a piano. Like, his descent, into losing his soul is complete.
But
and by the way, for you, his wife, you're never getting in that. You're never getting through that door
obviously,
ever again.
Spoiler, Coppola does. I actually agree with you. Something we said before. I actually think Godfather 2 is even better, even though this film's almost perfect. But that's why also, by the way, I will say I'll never totally hate on him for making number 3. Because, bro, technically, someone should have said
roll the dice.
Someone should have said to him after number 1, bro, just leave this. This is perfect. Don't ever do a sequel. But because he killed it, mate, if you killed it on the sequels, well, you can't do anything. Yeah, that's what you are, Brandon. Brother, I can do anything I want now. Get the fuck out of my way.
Here's the thing, Duncan, mate. I have tried so hard with 3.
You want to like it? Of course. You even love Andy Garcia. There's so much you want to like about it. You can't. It's trash. It's total trash.
It's really bad. And it's like, I've tried so much to like gaslight myself. But I just can't.
I'm trying to do the edgy tape. Maybe I'm the one who understands it, though. Maybe there's like secret depth. There is.
Did you watch? Okay, this is the measure. If you haven't watched this, you might be able to gaslight yourself. A couple of years ago, I want to say, it might have been 2021, I'm not too sure. He did a recut. He recut it himself, called it The Death of Michael Corleone, right? And put it out. It went out on all streaming stuff. I don't know if it's on Blu-ray or not. So anyway, me like a motherfucker, I've seen Godfather Part 3 more times than any human being should sit through that movie. And I was like, right, well, this is the one. And it opens up with Francis Ford Coppola, by the way, just in like one of them oxblood maroon chairs, like in front of like telling you why he recut the movie and stuff as like the intro. And I was like, oh man, maybe he's like, nah, you can't. It's probably better, but it's like you can't polish your turd. It's basically like the Snyder cut. You know what I mean? Is it better? Yeah. Is it good? Right. Nah. It's like that. It's like the Snyder cut of crime movies. But anyway, give that a try. You might be able to gaslight yourself into thinking it's better. So it is possible. I believe. I want to believe.
I think what's so interesting about Diane Keaton's character is like it's such a good piece of film storytelling to have her involved in this and the way that she's involved in this as well, because obviously she's Michael's girlfriend, so she's not familiar with this. They introduce her at the wedding itself, so you get her, Michael explaining everything to her within those scenes. So it really helps acclimate the audience to it, and then she goes away.
The premise of Michael originally is he's supposed to be the civilian one, so he was being fired for her to be with him. They were going to be normal people.
And she's not Italian. She's not from this culture, so you get not only the crime introduction, but also the Italian introduction, and like if you are not Italian or Italian American coming into this, you actually are kind of inducted into it via this technique, and then. It works brilliantly because he leaves, obviously, when he starts murdering people. And so she never really sees this side of him because he he basically just ghosts her, right? And he vanishes and he goes to Sicily, gets married to somebody else. Better believe he never told her about that either. Then he shows back up and begs for her to marry him, and she just thinks he's the same person. And it's that moment at the end where she realizes how much he's changed, because she was absent from his life from the entirety of like the point of him starting to actually like murder people on behalf of the mafia to, you know, his return and his ascension into his father's place. And I think it's just a really well-crafted role and like really well-crafted character arc, because it allows us first off to be introduced into this world, and then also to watch the character's reaction to the changes that we have seen as an audience very subtly occur over like 2 hours. And then it's just like, it just clicks for her all at once. And it clicks for you too, watching as somebody in the audience.
Well, it's super interesting as well because, as I said, I think she had done before this. I think she'd done maybe in terms of major movies. I think she'd done one Woody Allen movie. I can't remember the chronology, but I think she did like, because I know she was in that Play It Again, Sam, that fucked up comedy based on Casablanca that Woody Allen did. She's in that. So I can't remember if that came before this or not. But
Same
anyway,
year, I just looked it up. This is 1972 also.
She'd done one Woody Allen movie basically prior to this, like in terms of all of her big films, and like she wasn't regarded as like you know, she was like a, you know, someone you put in the background, you know, like you weren't gonna ever cast her. For her to just come into this particular film and in many ways be the insert for the audience, I guess, to some degree. As much as you can be in a ridiculous,
I think that's what's so interesting is that she is at first the insert for the audience, and then she is later used to demonstrate Michael the shift that has happened in Michael's character arc, which is just, it's you could also argue it's just like a brilliant writing tool, right? It's a brilliant writing technique to put her in that.
You could also argue she's the insert for like judgment.
Sure.
You know, at some point later. I mean, it definitely gets more into it in Godfather Part 2. The famous scene from that is she aborts Michael's child and explicitly tells him, I aborted your baby. I didn't lose it because I didn't want to bring it into this world with you. And it's like really fucking powerful. It's like insane. And what's also crazy is she did date Al Pacino. I don't think they were dating at the start of Godfather Part 1. I think they might have met on the set and fomented a on-off crazy relationship. They were by Part 2. But anyway, I think she is fucking stellar in this film. You know, in terms of like, she is meant to be the Woody Allen insert for the dream. It's kind of like what we talked about in 500 Days of Summer. What was it they would call them? The
Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yes, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, yes.
Before the Manic Pixie Dream Girl existed, basically Diane, Keaton, whatever Woody Allen was doing with his like kooky girls, he saw Diane Keaton and thought that she is that and will always be that and is perfect for that, and he cast her in a ton of movies because of it. But I mean, ultimately, she isn't that in this. She is very straight-laced, very prim, very proper, very austere, and she's just wonderful. Yeah, naive, exactly, naive. But also, she knows at the end. Duncan's right. She knows. It's a test. It's a test. It's a test. And then obviously when he says, and you can ask me this once, and then you will never ask me about
exactly. Come on.
Yeah. You know, that's it. You know what's going on there.
This one time. This one time, I'll let you ask me about my affairs.
And that's why linguistically it ties to the image of the door being slammed. I mean, I'm sure they weren't thinking about making a sequel when they made the movie.
I doubt it.
I'm pretty sure metaphorically that door closing at the end, it's also the door closing on the audience's view into this world.
This aspect, no one ever mentions this, but they don't just put the christening scene to bookend the wedding scene.
Yeah.
He's becoming the Godfather in both senses.
Yes.
He is literally becoming someone's Godfather and the Godfather. Like,
Michael, do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth?
I do.
It's actually, this is one thing I also like about this film, a bit like what we were talking about, all the characters that give you an in or a prism to see the family through. Notice how they don't ever do what is bad writing. Famous classic thing in fiction that you don't do is tell people what's happening and what people feel. You show them, you make them feel it. Like what this movie doesn't do is do what they do in a modern day film, which is you'd have the cops in it and then they'd go, we see the way the family's constructed is, and they'd have that board. You got the capo, and they don't ever do that, but through the way the movie tells the story and the character, you get all of that. You actually get everything about the difference. Like we're saying, you get the difference between what's like to be part of the family, but as in just the mafia part, but not the actual family. You get what it's like to be part of the family, but then not the criminal part. You get what it's like to work for the family, but you'll never be Italian. It's actually brilliant the way it tells the story. It just shows you the whole world, and you travel through it with all these characters. That's why I think, like I said at the beginning, considering this film is almost 3 hours long, bro. One, if you don't like the first half an hour, you could tune out. You don't need to watch the rest. It's not for you. But if you do like it, you are going to fucking love this film. The first two films are just like a masterclass of like pacing, characterization. They're just phenomenal.
Yeah, and I mean, I love that, you know, the final montage as well that we were just referencing with the identity of the Godfather, because I think maybe people don't understand what the role of a Godfather, if you take that role very seriously, is, which is that, you know, it's not an easy commitment. Like, I feel maybe in modernity, people ask, hey, would you be my kid's Godfather, very lightly? And people say yes without really understanding what that means. And the parents who have asked that of somebody else ask it without expecting anything in return. But in the reality in this situation, which is Michael is going to become the godfather of his sister's child, right? Which is where we get this baptism scene, and he has to be there, is that there is this Catholic ceremony that goes along with that. He has to be there because he is effectively becoming an emergency or third parent within this relationship with duties, responsibilities. It is, you know, somebody who's going to be there for the duration of that child's life and raise them. And you get that metaphorically, like that's the literal sense of the Godfather, but the family ties, you know, and you could be the Godfather, obviously, of somebody who's not your, you know, nephew or niece in this case, right? But, you know, that is metaphorically taken by Vito Corleone. And, you know, he does things for people. You know, he is responsible for Johnny Fontaine's rise because he's adjacent to the family, and because, you know, he expects things in return. And you get that full circle moment too, when he asks, the coroner comes in and says, hey, these assholes raped my daughter and I didn't get justice from the American, you know, judicial system. And so I need you to see that they get justice. And he says, okay, I will do it, but I'm going to come ask for you, you know, something of you at some point in time. And you have to say yes.
Someday, and that day may never come, I'll call upon you to do a service for me. But until that day, accept this justice as a gift on my daughter's wedding day.
And it sounds very sinister, but what it ends up actually being is kind of a heartbreaking moment where the favor he asks is just to like make Sonny's body presentable to Sonny's mother, which is like, it's not, you know, he's not asking for violence in return. He's asking for a very personal favor that this guy does, you know, the best that he can as a coroner to.
I'm sure if Sonny hadn't got shot, though, he would have been doubling up the bodies in the coffins. Like, you know what I mean? That's what you keep a coroner on the hook for, you know, or a mortician or whatever.
But, you know, it's not always some level of insidious scheme. And you know, he takes this role and he says, you know, if I'm going to take responsibility, basically, if I'm going to be the father figure in this situation that cleans up your mistakes, then you owe me. And like, we are now in a relationship like that. Right. And so I think that's so cool, is that the way they do the literal Godfather kind of initiation with the baby into him becoming the mob boss through the acts of violence that are perpetuated in this mob montage, where he goes out and he kills the other Dons because he knows, because Vito told him that it wasn't actually who they thought killed Sonny. It was one of the different Dons that killed Sonny. So we just have to kill them all at this point in time. And also fuck you, Mo Green, on your massage table.
100% fuck more green forever. Like, that's what, like, I mean, the montage is satisfying, but I also love the way that they wrap up all the traitors as well. Like what you realize in the last few scenes, including the murderous montage and then the last two murders in the film, what you realize is Michael is actually fucking savage. Like he's more savage than Vito ever was.
Because, well, I mean, the risk he takes, like if those hits fail, like he's fucked, man.
Yeah, the whole
family. Remember, this was a
They're
guy who walked into a room and shot a police officer and someone else. Essentially, even though he says it's for business too, he also obviously does that for the personal reason, doesn't he? That's a fucking epic scene too.
Well, at the end, I mean, you know, Carlo, who's his sister's husband, who is slapping her around. He betrayed Sonny. They find that out. He gets got. They tell him, we're just going to exile you. You don't ever see, you know, my sister again. And then immediately kill him in the car. Like, he doesn't even get, like, put it this way, like, at least Adriana in The Sopranos got a nice drive. Like, you know what I mean? At least she got a look. She knew, obviously, the whole time. You know, but like, at least she got to see some nice, like, scenery and that. Like, Carlo gets in the car. Maybe I am being exiled. You fuck. You fuck, son. Murdered straight away. And then obviously, Tezio gets got as well. And that's the best one because he just goes out like a man and goes, you couldn't get me off the hook for old time's sake, could you? Nah, can't. Killing you. Sorry, mate. Oh, right.
Tom, can you get me off the hook? For old time's sake.
Can't do it, Sally.
And it's like all the traitors get like Michael cleans fucking house. That's it. The Corleones, they win, but it took Michael being installed and going into this like mega mode. Like they've got more Green's casinos, more Green's dead. All the Dons. I think all the Dons of the other families are dead. He's killed them all. He's murked them all. All the traitors in the family gone, and then that's that. Michael's just gonna sit on a throne of blood. It's unbelievable. And as I said, I mean, listen, you get drawn into it a little bit. Every time I watch this film, when I watch that montage, then I go, yeah. But it's like Duncan says, like these are good people you're rooting for. Like what you're complicit in is actually horrifying. That you're Team Corleone, you know.
It's also that at least the existence of the five families you feel like was mitigating unbridled violence to a certain degree, right? Because there was tension and some level of like fear of the other families. With Michael just murdering everybody, you're like, oh shit, what's next, man? Like,
you do realize, guys, here's what's funny. Everyone thought in that Sicario episode, it's horrifying the notion that the EA would be like, hey, it's better to have cartels running it than us just dealing with one of them. This is the same concept, but in America, by the way. This is like in New York City, for fuck's sake. And that's essentially like a lesser of two evils argument that you actually almost have to swallow to watch the film.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'll add this as well, just as
because I actually do love that way they phrase it. That's the way these guys all think on some level. They are still God-fearing Christian men, etc. They explain that. Look, when we sell the drugs, though, we'll do it in a controlled way. You're gonna get people addicted to heroin, you bad cunt, you know.
Yeah, no, but they say that as well, like you don't sell around schools, like
exactly.
Wow,
I know. It's all like, hey, there's lines to this shit. I know exactly. I love it.
Like, oh, sound. Yeah, sound. Then, like, as long as we're not selling it to kids, it's all right, you know.
I want to control it as a business to keep it respectable. I don't want it near schools. I don't want it sold to children. That's an infamia.
But yeah, just to put a kind of final point in, you know, in it about like just sort of, you know, why the movie I think has resonated for as long as it has, is it's this to me is so rich in terms of what it pulls from like classic literature. This is like as rich and deep as any classic novel. Yeah, obviously it's got a visual shorthand because it's a film. But when you think about the topics and the subject matter and the way it's told, we're really talking about essentially, you know, the dark underbelly of the American dream and all of this stuff. Now, that might be a cliche now, but these aren't topics that people really explored, particularly not through the lens of crime. That's like still a bit, you know, even in the 70s, you know, in the 50s, it was very important that in your, you know, we've talked about noir. Obviously, I'm a big noir guy. It was very important in the 50s in these crime movies that the villain had to die at the end. Like, we have to be absolutely explicit about that. That crime does not pay. And the ones that kind of deviate from that are deeply shocking, and we're hit with all of, like, Hays Code bullshit or whatever it was at the time, and censorship and demands for rewrites. This is just a movie essentially about American history and what it is to be American, what it is to take power, what it is to rule, what it is to be involved in crime. It's like
and also a sympathetic approach to Italian Americans, right? Because, it's not that they weren't known for mafia and crime, because they were, but, they didn't have a lot of opportunities. Let's just put it that way. There was a lot, the deck was very much stacked against them because of the reputation that they had as immigrants to America. And this is something that they did in order to make ends meet.
What's hilarious about this is whatever it's called, the Italian American League or whatever. They did everything they could to try and get this movie shut down production wise. They fucking hated it, and the irony there is that was founded by Joe Colombo. Right? So
who was one of
the
Five Families guys? If you don't,
yes,
know. The Colombo family was one of the real Five Families.
Joe Colombo, to distract from his reputation, his background, founded this Italian American League, which basically would push back against any negative reputation, anything that would harm Italian Americans reputationally, because they said, like, we've been treated like an underclass, racially discriminated against, all of our history, and all you ever talk about with Italian America is fucking pizza or crime, right? And so Joe Colombo, by the way, for a criminal, was a great orator. He would go out and give all these impassioned speeches about this topic. And so it's kind of interesting, I think, that actually I think this did a lot for Italian Americans. I don't think it peddled and trafficked in stereotypes. Yeah, there's crime, sure, but also what a wonderful insight into the family, the pageantry, the loyalty, the history, the way, particularly in Godfather Part 2, when you see the squalor that Don Corleone came from and the tenement buildings they had to live in. I think it's actually a foundational movie for understanding the Italian American experience. And what I love about that is The Sopranos have their own episode where the Italian that some college is trying to ban Columbus Day. It's been so long since I've seen like season 1 or season 2 of The Sopranos. But anyway, they're trying to ban Columbus Day because they say Christopher Columbus is like a butcher, and Tony's there going, "He's a proud Italian American," and he's like, they all go down and they all have a fist fight over it, and they the mob are the Italian American League in that episode. But I think this movie's like. It's historic. It takes you to a world you could never be in, makes you understand it. I mean, we haven't even talked about just the Sicily bit in the middle, like where you just see Michael walk around Sicily.
It's my least favorite part of this movie, but sure, we could do that.
Yeah, because it's so important. It's where he gets it. It's where he understands what it is. He goes back to the motherland. It's an experience all immigrants dream of.
Sure. I mean, my issues with this is I just had a chuckle because, like, obviously if they're trying to hide him, sending him back to Sicily where everyone else also has connections is probably a very good way to get him killed.
Yeah.
And it nearly happens, by the way. It's like, maybe that's not the best place to hide him. Number one, where literally you're just chilling in the town that your family's named after, waiting for the hitmen to come for you.
But also, it's about the audacity. No one's they just sent him there. They didn't think anyone was actually going to try and hit him. The audacity of it all, So, but I love that. I love that bit in the middle as well. Shows the contrast. Here's where we come from. Here's how we live culturally in Sicily, and how it informs the way we do things in America in a totally different environment and a totally different culture. It's like this movie's like, It's a 10 out of 10. It's a bona fide classic.
Sure.
Like I just can't say enough good things about it.
I will point out a couple things that I do find amusing, and by no means do I think this really detracts from the movie at all. It makes me chuckle.
It didn't have dinosaurs in it. I'll concede that point. It
didn't have cheesy quips. No, but one thing that I find really funny about this movie, and like, look, you got to do things sometimes for pacing, and the payoffs of these scenes are worth it. But I do find it funny that on occasions, especially in a movie as long as this one, they will literally just show you one thing, and then that thing immediately dies or like plays into this very key plot point. So for example, I know they're trying to move the scene along with the film producer, and they're trying to show Vito's power even in Los Angeles, right, on the other coast. But it is hilarious that they go to that film producer, and the one scene is like, do you want to see my really expensive horse that I love? And then like 3 minutes later, the horse is dead. I'm like, really? Like, this is kind of ridiculous. And similarly in Sicily.
Yeah, I understand why they've done it that way, obviously.
You got to move it along, but it is funny. It is just.
Well, it's not just that though. It's that we will, even though you're only talking to Tom Hagen.
Yes.
You bring out something you're incredibly proud of, something that you want, love its value to you, you treasure it, right? And you're just talking to Tom. Tom's not a bad guy, right? Tom's just a consigliere. He's just a lawyer. Right?
It's just the way the movie is crafted, where that's like the one scene. You know, it's not a series of scenes. It's just kind of like non sequitur. Here's my horse, and then here's the horse in his vet. Which is an all-time great scene, right? It's an all-time memorable scene. I love it too. But it is just funny. I hadn't seen this movie in a long time, and I just forgot. It's just he's like, look at my horse, and I'm like, I know what's gonna happen to that horse, right? I'm just like, oh, that was sudden and awkward.
It is quick. That horse fucked around and found out, basically.
The other one that's very much like that is with Apollonia, his wife in Sicily, where she's like, I'm learning to drive the car, Michael. And then like 3 minutes later, she just blows up in the car. Like, all right, well.
Yeah.
Michele, aspettami lì che vengo da sola fino da te.
No! No, I
It's like even the first time I saw this movie, I was like, well, I wonder how she's gonna die. Like, it's out of nowhere. Like, apropos of nothing, you don't need to learn how to drive, but look at me. I'm like, I want to be like an American.
Moment. Like the one part that is a bit jarring about the script is why he just comes and goes, by the way, I'm Michael Corleone hiding out on Sicily now. Can I have a date now? Like, what?
The whole thing is whack in Sicily.
Whatever. It's just not a scene, to be fair, that whole scene. It's only half an hour.
It doesn't really take away from the movie. Yeah. And a lot of these things are really, you really only notice them, I think, if you've seen the movie more than one time, because the moments are so iconic, and so the setup is just a little silly if you know what's going to happen, because it's very it just they kind of like beat you over the head with it to start things, but it's fine. It's still a great movie.
It's weak foreshadowing. It's weak foreshadowing.
I just let me say, look at my prize horse.
No, it does have some weak foreshadowing. That's right. But yeah, I mean, like Duncan, I guess you should give the final soliloquy about this movie, as it was your pick.
I think I've said most of it. I think it really just is a film. Like, here's the difference. When we mentioned earlier how this film will always be one of the top-rated films, actually, I have to say, and a lot of young people had the experience I will have done. When you're young and you think of like classic films, and you go and you look up, what are the greatest films ever according to the people I can trust, the critics, the experts. You go and you look at that Cinema Insight list, and mate, you are going to have the most disappointing 15 hours of your fucking life. They are picking like Italian language films from 1938 that are subtitled, that were never anything if you didn't understand like the history of cinema, and it's just wankery to show off how exotic and outre your tastes are. Yeah. So the difference is, you actually probably, if you're 19, you probably shouldn't watch Citizen Kane. Wait till you're 30 to watch that. You know what, Vertigo, you're not going to get it. It's going to be weird and it's going to be out there and you're not going to appreciate it. This film is the one on the list that you are actually going to have a chance to really enjoy. This is the 10 out of 10 that almost can't fail. Like, essentially, The only angle I could see from which someone wouldn't like this film is maybe if they just can't handle films that are about like dark realities of life or something, or they can't handle like violence, for example. Maybe that could put you off. But aside from that, I think it's one of the only films I can think of where I feel like it should appeal to the largest audience of people who love great films. And as I said earlier, a bit like certain people in history, a lot of things are mega overrated in life. A lot of things that are even good are just said to be amazing. This is one of those ones where like it isn't exaggerated. It is just that. It's like I always say about the comic Watchmen. You don't want to normally say the best comic is the most famous one ever. That's what it's like with this film. This might be the most famous film ever, but it also might be the best film ever. It's really possible.
Yeah, it's so hard to find critique with it. And obviously, look, here's the giveaway how good this movie is. You know what film critique has devolved into these days. If there was a possible angle to slate this film, it would have been done. Somebody would have said, well, actually, after a reappraisal of it would have been that, because that happens to great movies all the time. There are great movies that come out. They bomb at the box office.
The Godfather is. Richard,
yeah,
50
exactly.
years later.
I mean, listen, it's problematic by design. It's all the better for it. You know what I mean? It's you're looking at what's meant to be an authentic look at a crime family. Guess what? They're not nice people. They don't say very nice things. They hold reprehensible views. So if it does feel problematic, job done. You know. Cinema,
but
you know,
Richard, that's not what we want from art anymore. We need to be coddled by our entertainment.
But like I said, no one has found a way to genuinely deride this film in a way that would feel authentic. And just given, it's 50 years old, it would have happened. That's how you know. That's the test. The test of time. You know, there are so many movies that are popular in and of the moment, and they don't last. And there are some movies that never get recognized in their time and then get rediscovered, decades later, and it's super interesting. But when a movie comes out, is recognized at the time it comes out as being one of the best, and then at no point does that opinion alter for 50 years. You got to think about how long that is. How many movies have been released? Like it's insane, so it tells its own story. And I am envious of anyone who gets to watch this film for the first time. I genuinely believe it.
I also really enjoyed the rewatch. I thought it was mega. It was a pleasure to rewatch.
Yeah, just it delivers every time. It delivers. It made me want to put on Godfather Part 2, like immediately. Not Part 3, as we've discussed, but
you probably would have just amped yourself up into trying it again. Sounds like. Nope, you're over it. Okay.
Nah, I'm 100% over it.
All right.
Looking forward to Goodfellas, though.
Yeah, Goodfellas next week. I actually forgot to mention at the start of the episode that we are doing Roger Ebert's pick as well. So just like we did in Spit Roast, where we picked 500 Days of Summer. And shout out to you guys who enjoyed that one, because that has actually become one of our most viewed episodes of all time. It turns out there were a lot of haters of that movie, guys. I don't know if you saw any of the comments on that, but many people felt vindicated by our opinions of that and had their own stories to tell about significant others that had gaslit them into thinking this movie was good for a time, or saying that they were themselves teenagers or young adults and really hate this movie these days, even though they once had a strange fondness for it. But we are going to be doing Casablanca from Roger Ebert, which we pulled from his list of the 10 best films of all time. And I think that's
we've done him a massive favor there. We've done him a massive favor.
We picked one that we all like. Let's just put it that way. Maybe we don't agree on some of his other ones that were on that list. Anyway, guys, we will see you next week for Goodfellas. Till then.